I appreciate everybody joining. Very excited about today. Today's topic is Stop Asking AI for Answers, a strategic framework for using AI as a thinking partner. And my guest today is Bob Tiede, who is with Leading with Questions. He has written an awesome book called Leading with Questions, and it's how leaders discover powerful answers by knowing how and what to ask. I went and read it while I listened to it because that's what I do. Michael Marquardt and Bob have written this book, and Bob's got a great story about the book, which you'll have to get from him at some point. He also has a website, leadingwithquestions.com, where he's in his 13th year of putting blog posts out. I just wrote a blog for his book on Monday, and that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So if you've read the blog, you're going to get a little bit of preview already for what we're going to be talking about today, but we're going to go into it in much more depth. Bob, why don't you give a little bit more information about yourself?
Brad, I'm just delighted to be with you. As you said, my blog launched in, I think, 2012, 13th year, followed by leaders in over 200 countries. But Brad, whenever I speak, I always start with a confession. And my confession is that for most of my career, I was a benevolent dictator because my only paradigm of leadership was I thought the job of a leader was to figure out what needed to be done. And then I said benevolent. I grew up in a home where I was taught to say please and thank you. So, Brad, if you'd been on my team, I don't think I ever would have said, hey, Brad, go do this. It'd been more like, hey, Brad, here's what we're working on. It'd be really great if you could please do this. And when you did it, I would have said thank you. But again, my paradigm was a leader needs to figure out what needs to be done and then kindly ask your staff to do it. And for me, that changed in 2000. I'm thinking back here. It must have been 2006 when I found the book, the first edition of Leading with Questions by Dr. Michael Marquardt, filled with stories of leaders literally from around the globe who were leading with questions and the questions they were asking. And as I read that book, I had only one question, Brad. Why hasn't anyone ever shared this paradigm of leadership with me before? Well, I became an instant convert and have been leading with questions ever since. And, there's so much more to the story. But Brad, the question we're asking here today is a cutting edge question. So many of us, well, we've realized, okay, AI is not a fad. It's not just going to go away. We better learn how to deal with it. But it's different than Google, isn't it, Brad?
It is different than Google, and that's what we're going to talk about. That's a great segue. This is the problem that happens most of the time when I go into training and I talk to executives or anyone that's using AI. They open ChatGPT, they type a question. Most of the time it's a yes, no question, like, should we expand into the Southwest? After they've written a pretty good prompt, people are getting better at that. They get their surface level question. They think it's not helpful. They move on. So today we're going to learn how to not use AI like magic 8 balls. So here's why it matters. And I talk to service businesses mostly. So this is a little bit of context towards the service business. Normally they either hire a big consultant that takes 2+ quarters that gives them some generic frameworks, or they do what Bob said, they do generic Google searches and everybody rages their point against those Google searches. They end up in analysis paralysis. And so what AI is the opportunity to change this paradigm and give them some on-demand strategic thinking to go along with their internal perspectives to get a better judgment call. So AI doesn't replace your judgment, but it can fundamentally change how you make that judgment. So this gets back to that paradigm as AI is not Google. You can't use it as Google. It's a thinking partner. You need to not ask it for facts, but explore frameworks. And we're going to talk about several different types of frameworks that you can build and explore with it. Instead of asking yes, no questions, ask for nuanced judgment and analysis. Instead of asking one question, work to build an iterative point of view with your AI to get a much better nuanced answer. So use it like a strategic advisor and not a search engine. So at the bottom, the bad question, should we add a new service line? The strategic question would be, walk me through 3 strategic approaches to expanding our service offerings, one conservative, one aggressive, one selective, and for each, show me the resource implications, margin impact, and client relationship risks. 3 is a really important number. 1 is what everybody normally puts. 2 is somewhat weak, but 3 is a good number that humans can get the right value at without being overwhelmed. It's marketing. They don't put 20 different kinds of ketchup on the shelf in one brand. They put 3, maybe they put 4, but they never put 1 and they never put 2 and they never put 20. It's always 3 or 4 because that's the right amount that humans can digest and make the decisions with. So as we iterate through, it's really important that we test our perspective and we have a power of follow up. Okay. So your starting question may be, give me 3 pricing strategies. Here's what our consulting firm's given us, and give it all of the different pieces. Then your next follow-up question might be, for the premium positioning it gave us, what are the first 3 implementation steps? And then maybe your second follow-up question might be, what are those metrics that we might use to see if it's working within the first 3 months? And then your next follow-up question might be, okay, you mentioned the client churn risk up here. How do we test for that client churn before we commit? And finally, a great question might be, what signals would you tell me to pivot to a different strategy? What might not working look like if we were going through this strategy? On the second is almost a whole framework by itself. And it might have needed its own chart, but I jammed it on this chart. And that's the what am I missing framework. And this is a great question to use outside of AI. I think it's in Bob's book even. You know, when you get to the end and you think you have an answer, you need to always ask yourself and always ask the AI, what am I missing? Because if you ask the AI that question, what am I missing? Then it will show you some new ways and new perspectives. When I give my class on what is AI, and I'm going to go into it, it's really important to understand these are deterministic probability machines, these large language models, and that's a big mouthful. But what it means is that it's like dropping marbles down a Plinko machine. And what you're doing every time you ask for a word, it's trying to find the nearest word in its model. So you're asking for a sentence full of words, and it tries to find the nearest words in its model that match that set of words. You're going to get a normal distribution curve. Sometimes the model is way out on the ends, a couple of sigmas away. We're going to talk probabilities here. And you feel like that's a bad answer or a wrong answer. It's not a wrong answer. It's just an improbable answer. But if you ask me, give me 3 answers or what am I missing? You're getting more or follow-ups. You're getting more pieces of the probabilistic model along the continuum that you need to understand the problem. So the strategic question framework, and this is where we're going to get back to talking a little bit more about the strategic questions in the iterative dialogue. Replace your yes, no questions with strategic questions. So these are the 4 things you need to do. Do that iterative dialogue. Try your perspective testing and including what are you missing, and then role play. And this is going to be the fun one. We're actually going to try it. That's why I turned on my microphone. We're going to practice some role play. Always keep it human-centered. We didn't talk about that in the beginning like I normally talk about. I believe that human-centered AI is the way to approach AI with all the fear. We are trying to now raise our people, ourselves up by getting rid of tasks and this understanding in a strategic way. Keeping humans in the loop when we're doing this strategy discussion is very important. So keeping you in control. So we're raising the humans up and using the AI tools for what they're good at. Anything to add, Bob, on that?
Well, Brad, this whole topic of asking the second, the third, the fourth question is just pure gold. Pure gold. You know, I think before I understood this concept of asking the second question, you know, normally we think, okay, we ask a question, we get an answer, well, we move on. And whenever I speak, I share that and say, we've all heard the story of the gold miner, the old guy who mined for gold all his life, looking for the gold vein, and he never found it. Somebody came along later and discovered the old guy was within 6 inches of the gold vein. That story is probably proverbial, but if you only ask the first question, get an answer and move on, you maybe got close, but you got to dig a little with the tell me more, say more about that, help me understand this. Those follow-up questions get you to the gold nugget. And so what you've shared here is pure gold.
And I really love the way you can express all of these stories that you've learned, that you're using some of these techniques in the real world. And that's the cool part about this. All these techniques that Bob teaches in his book on asking questions, you can use with AI. And some of those same techniques are what people have learned to prompt better, because the same kind of questions that make better answers from people still make better answers from the AI. So that's one of the best takeaways from today's discussion. So here's this three-part strategic question again. The number three is important. So you'll see three at each of these prompts. So the way I think about it is ask for three and ask for a contrast or a compare. If you just do that little bit, give me three solutions and compare and contrast. Tack that on at the end of every prompt that you have, and you'll just have a much better time with AI. Okay, just tack that one sentence on to everything. But here's some more pointed ones. If you're doing a pricing strategy, instead of should we raise prices, give me three pricing strategies for professional services, premium positioning, volume-based, and value tier for each. So the revenue implications, the customer retention risks, and competitive positioning. So you can see that that's going to give you a much better answer. And sometimes it'll even build you the little chart that you might just even drop in your PowerPoint. The geographic expansion, should we expand into a new office? Compare three geographic expansion approaches: full office, hybrid, remote hub, partnership model. And for each, detail the capital requirements, talent acquisition challenges, and client acquisition timelines. Now, of course, you might have dropped your real data in before you ask that, but then you get a much more fulsome answer. And here's the really important part about this methodology, is that humans are good at synthesis. And I said it earlier, but I'm going to put a point on it. What the humans are good at is taking the first part of the first answer, the second part of the third answer, and maybe just a little tiny part of the middle answer. The same thing goes with chess. Computers are really good at seeing how all the moves go from move to move, and can give you what move you make when you make a blunder. But what people are good at is looking at the board and seeing if white's winning or if black's winning. Even a person that's just learned to play chess and has gotten the rules down, has gotten pretty good at it, and can beat the average person maybe that just picks up the chessboard, can see if white is winning or if black is winning. And that is a very difficult problem for a computer. So just like that problem, we are better at seeing using these three answers and coming up with the quote right answer or a right answer. So on the service portfolio, should we add the service, analyze three service portfolio strategies, depth in current offerings, adjacent expansion, or transformational new service, compare and contrast each potential strategy. So that one just says compare and contrast. So this is a great way. And I think this is whenever anybody asks me, what's the one hint that you would give me on AI? This is the one hint I give them. I don't tell them about prompting strategy or which large language model to use. I tell them this: ask for three things and compare and contrast the three things.
Another story. This was on a guest post on my blog, but this salesman was with an associate, was getting close to their client, but a bit too early. But they saw a Starbucks, so they stopped at Starbucks to kill some time. And while they're sitting there, they just observed what we've all observed, is that Starbucks offers three sizes. You get your tall, your grande, and your venti, or to a farm boy like me, the small, medium, and large. But they were thinking about that, and then they were thinking of the proposal they were going to present to this prospect. And they realized they only had one offering. And they realized Starbucks offers three things. And it just occurred to them that when you offer only one, the client is thinking yes or no. But when you offer two, it changes it a little bit. But when you offer three, the client moves from yes or no to which one would be best. And so the same thing applies here. When you ask AI for three strategies, three answers, three possibilities, then your mind is moving to which of those three would be best for me. And of course, if you choose one, then you can ask more questions about that one.
And by the way, I have used this strategy and I came up with a fourth answer that had nothing to do with the three, which I wouldn't have done typically if I would have just gotten one. But what it let me to do is find the in betweens and the
Yes.
extrapolations past the three and things like that. And what we want to do with all of these strategies is make our brains work better. These are brain enhancement engines. LLMs are brain enhancement engines. And what they can do is make your brains work in a more strategic way if you use them in that strategic way. So these are really exciting stories, Bob, to understand how the real world can relate to these same kind of helpful strategies. So here's one that's really fun, role practice. And I've done this with AI. And now that AI works so well with voice commands, it's near real time. And we're going to practice with that in just a second. You can use it to prompt for hard conversations. And what you need to do is feed as much data in about the person you're going to be. You might even just cut and paste their LinkedIn profile. There's nothing wrong with that. Just cut and paste their LinkedIn profile or their resume or write in everything that you know about them. And then ask it about the hard thing that you're trying to do. I'm presenting a 500,000 AI implementation. That'd be really great. Let's everybody go and ask that to their boss. A 500,000 AI implementation to our board. Role play this with you as our most skeptical board member who worries about the ROI and implementation risk and has already talked to the CFO and has decided against it. I mean, I would add all of that stuff to it. So how do I talk him into it? And what it does is it makes you really test the objections, test how you would say it, keep from saying all the negative pieces, stay out of the potholes. And we know that these types of conversations at the bottom, difficult employee conversations, client negotiations, leadership disagreements, and investor pitches are hard conversations that take practice. So the more you can practice with AI, you may give it your investor pitch and let it ask you hard investor questions at the end. I can tell you it knows more investor questions than the typical average investor. I've been asked a lot of investor questions. You tell it to ask the hardest investor questions once you get done with your investor pitch, and you'll be impressed by the investor pitch questions that it asks you. Bob, what do you think of this strategic framework?
AI is already so helpful, but to have this conversation, to role play with it, and completely safe. And if you blow it on your side, guess what? No one dies.
And you can just start again. That's the great thing.
Yes.
So here's what we're going to do now. We're going to have a live demonstration, but I'm not going to type each of these in because I've already done that work, okay? But here's what I want to do is show you the answers. So here's the question. Your top performer wants to work remotely, okay? And then so you just go in and should say, should I let my top performer work remotely? The AIs are getting, I'm running ChatGPT 5.1. The AIs are getting where they answer that question better. So it actually gives a pretty good answer, and it gives three options, okay? Not a terrible answer. It's not giving they've gotten better where they're not giving us such bad answers. But look how much better it is when we give the three approach, full accommodation, hybrid, or deny with a retention strategy and analyze them for morale impact, precedent setting risk, and alternatives. You've written a pretty good prompt to tell it now. And by the way, there's no context. These are all no context. They're just that you've seen exactly what I put in. Okay. So here's what it does now. Team morale impact, precedent setting risk, underlying need alternatives. Here's the hybrid compromise. Here's deny. And here's some strategic guidance at the end. I do have my ChatGPT set up in my settings, and you can learn how to do this on my website to always give me follow-up strategic guidance. So on all of my prompts, it'll always give me follow-up strategic guidance. Now, here's my iterative follow-up question one. For the hybrid approach, what's the specific structure prevents it from feeling arbitrary to the other team members? So here's a great set of answers. Look at this. Eligibility requirement, anchor days, performance thresholds, time box pilot, and the path forward. And under each one of these, it's got a detailed answer. Here's the second iterative follow-up. What questions should I ask the employee to understand what's really driving their request? So when you get on, what are the questions that we're going to ask? Okay, why did this happen? What's the context? What's the nature of the problem? What is the productivity reality? Can you really do your best work at home? What about your team interaction? That's one I always want to ask. And what's the culture? What's the boundary trade-off? What's the long-term intent? Are you really trying to get away from the company, or are you really a person that needs to work at home? And how much risk and candor can you have with this person without scaring them off? Great set of questions. I mean, that Bob, that's almost taken from some of your book right there. Really good set of questions that AI came up with. And then the last one is perspective testing. What am I missing? What would a culture expert say about the long term? And I love this. Put the role with your what am I missing? Okay. The AI is really good at finding a point in that distribution that's the role. And so here we go. What it said is the culture expert would push you to pass this surface logic. What's the symbolism? What's the proximity bias? It's never going to go away. So human nature beats the policy. Okay. Expectations shape norms faster than the leaders expect. So the minute that you let this happen, blah, blah, so all of these great perspectives. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. Here's the fun part. Now I'm going to do an actual role practice. So okay, we're going to do a role play using all the data that you just found. You're going to be the employee. I'm going to be the manager. Don't put any front end or tail ends onto any of the answers that you give. I'm going to start the first question now. I heard you want to work remotely. Can you give me 3 reasons why you want to work remotely?
Sure. First, I'd like the flexibility to manage my work hours a bit more around my personal commitments. Second, I think I'll actually be more productive without the commute and the distractions of the office. And third, I've noticed that the kind of work I do can be done just as effectively from home, and I'd still be in touch with the team virtually.
Well, that's great, but just being in touch with the team virtually might not be the best answer. How can you stay more connected with the team? That's the one thing I'm the most worried about is the culture of the company.
Absolutely, I understand that concern. One thing I do is commit to more frequent video check ins, maybe even daily stand ups to keep everyone in the loop. I'd also be proactive about joining team discussions and making sure I'm available during core hours. Basically, I'd make an extra effort to be visible and engaged so the culture still feels strong.
Those are great suggestions. But could we maybe find a hybrid solution where you're in the office 2 days or 3 days each week? What about that?
Yeah, I think a hybrid setup could definitely work. Coming in 2 or 3 days a week would let me stay connected face to face and still have the flexibility of working remotely the rest of the time. So I'm definitely open to that.
Okay, well, let's work on that. Why don't you come back to me with a plan and then we'll work on that next week.
Sounds like a plan. I'll put together a proposal and we can go over it next week.
Okay, so you saw it was pretty good at that. It's pretty good at this role playing job. I'm better than you think, honestly. And if you give it more context, I gave it 0 context and we had a really fun time. What do you think of that, Bob?
Loved it. Loved it. And you got to a solution.
Yeah. And of course, now you can say you're a very obstinate employee and you're never going to answer. Give it, if the person is super obstinate, give it all of that because AI is accommodating, as we all know. It's going to give in faster than the average person, but it won't if you tell it not to. If you tell it to hold the line, it will hold the line.
Oh, Brad, I'm,
So,
I'm, I'm thinking of a fun story. Bill Walton, when he was playing for John Wooden at UCLA, wanted to have long hair and a beard. And so he went to the coach, John Wooden, and said, "Hey, coach, to be myself, I really want to have long hair and a beard." And he waited for an answer. And Coach Wooden said, "Bill, we're sure going to miss you."
and sometimes you have to hold the line. Okay. I always give a framework and we're going to have questions. It's going to run past 1. So if you have to leave at 1, I understand. Typically we try and hold these to 1 with a little bit of Q&A at the end. If you have questions, put in the chat or send me an email. We'll get your answers back. I always try and give a framework to try and do this, to take these and implement it in your actual work on a day-to-day basis. So week 1, start small, find one scenario that you can use the strategic 3 scenario questioning framework with. Week 2, go deeper, ask a few of the follow-up questions, work through the follow-up. Week 3, find a conversation that's hard and practice it. And week 4, teach somebody else, your leadership team, somebody around your work, and share what worked with them. Okay, so that's the framework. I want to go quickly first to this, then we'll go back to questions. So the resources for continued learning, I have a 3-step process with an executive briefing that's no sales deck, just an honest look at where your pain points and your goals are if you want to do that. The other thing is Bob's got a book. You can get it physical copy, which I have, which I did read, but I used Audible. We gave Bob some extra money for Audible book. You can get my free book to help you plan your strategy here, and you can visit Bob's site to learn more about it by clicking on that. You'll get, if you registered for this, you'll get this PowerPoint presentation in Gamma. It'll send you the link to go to Gamma, and you'll get all of this. All of these links are clickable. In fact, those first links on the first page to be able to go to our site. With that, I will stop the share, and if you give me 2 seconds, I will turn on all of everybody's information so that they can now unmute themselves and start their video. And then we will look at the chat to see if there's any questions. So there's no questions in the chat. So if anybody wants to ask a question, they can unmute themselves and jump in and ask questions.
Brad, can I ask the first question?
Absolutely, Bob.
You know, I read recently an experience that some companies are having is that, first of all, context is they're already busy. I mean, they're overwhelmed currently with all they're doing. And so they then ask AI to give input, and AI gives them input, and they feel overwhelmed by the input. It's like, hey, great ideas, but how in the world would we get that done on top of everything else we're trying to do? And they end up later saying, oh, yeah, we tried AI. It really wasn't helpful. How do you respond to somebody who's had that initial experience?
I think that AI is just like the rest of the input that you get from your leadership team or your peers or your boss. You have to treat that as another input that you can synthesize with other inputs that you get. And the overwhelmedness is not going to go away, and it's probably not even caused by AI. It's caused by our world of living in a hyper exponential changing world. I used to say an exponential changing world. We live in a linear body where time runs linearly, and now the world of technology, especially, is moving at a hyper exponential rate. And so our mind is broken by that. So that's that overwhelmed feeling. And it happens without technology, but the technology is making it worse. And so what we have to do is all slow down to go fast. I recently wrote an article about that, and take in the data that we have to and stop multitasking and make that single decision. And AI is just a piece of that decision. Okay, I see Candace on the line. How about that? Candace ended up being a mutual friend of both Bob and mine that we did not know about. Isn't that great?
I love it. I love seeing both of you guys together, and some other people had been on the call earlier that I knew too. My question is this: at this point, I know you use Chat GPT as the example. You know, we know about hallucinations, we know about data integrity and all. What's your recommendation to make sure that whatever we put into the system doesn't go on to teach it to help someone else? I mean, how do we protect ourselves before we get into it? And what's your recommendation on which AI to start with?
So both of those are really good questions, and I'm gonna share again just because I want to show one thing, and it's important. And I'll go back to the Chat GPT view on that share. Is that there is a little button down here that when you go to settings, and if you're on the paid plan, then you can set on your data controls, and you can say improve the model off. So you're not actually sending any of that improvement to the model anymore. And this is on every model. You just have to find it. It's in a different spot. Perplexity, Claude, Grok, it's all on there. They all have it. They all have to have it now. I don't think by law, but now it's more by competitive pressure that they all have it. If you're on the enterprise plan, it's even more tightly locked down. You can't actually even turn it on if you're on the enterprise plan. Okay, so that's the good part about being on it. But on personal plans, you have to implicitly turn it off. And by the way, check it every now and then, because I've seen it turn itself back on because I think they're a little bit semi-evil. I don't know how else to put that. So you need to go and continue to check it. They're technology companies, so they want your data. So continue to check it that it's turned off. Okay, so back to the question of what's the best AI. I'm using them all because I have to, and I learn a lot from each one. So let me tell you, when I give my training, I think they all now have different flavors. And by the way, those flavors change from week to week. They're like a Neapolitan ice cream sandwich, which I happen to have in my freezer and I have been eating. So it's a great analogy. But right now, ChatGPT is my favorite go-to for generalized knowledge. And it has the web search built in as for scratch. And if you hook it to your own tools, you can hook it to your email and your calendar, and it sees those tools automatically, which is really nice. You can say, search my email for the last time I sent Canvas. So it would find that last correspondence you and I had, and I could find the document that you shared with me, which would be really helpful. That'd be a great example, actually, for myself. And so ChatGPT is great for that. Claude is still the leader in writing and writing code and writing words. Okay. And so if you need a creative writing partner, Claude is the leader at that. Or if you need to write code, Claude's the leader at that. I have Claude Code in another desktop on my Mac that is off writing code. I think it's stopped now, but every now and then I go over there and tell it to do the next feature or bug fix because I'm writing some fun little SaaS apps just to prove to myself that I can still do it, although I'm not writing a line. And then the last one is Google Gemini just came out. So Claude's new model 4.5, its best version just came out last week. And then 2 weeks ago, Gemini's best version, Google's version came out. Those are the big three. And everything else is second place, even Grok second place these days. Google is far and away the best general model today. It's the best at working through hard problems, strategic problems, working these iterative problems. It's the one I would go ask the things today if I was just going and working on the kind of questions we were looking at today. I worked through an entire positioning rebrand of my site. And if you see, I moved from general service business to professional services businesses. And I asked it to really do a deep positioning of how that was seen from the customer perspective and what did they get out of it and how I could really make that model something that I could come up to somebody and talk to them quickly about and it would stick instead of I'm an AI consultant or I'm an AI consultant for service businesses. It sounded too generic. So it worked through that with me and we worked for hours on it together. And it was amazing how good it did on that. And I actually said, I'm working in Squarespace now. And then I would cut and paste what I did. And he would say, oh, you got this part of the message right, but fix this thing over here. And it would look at and I don't like the way you did it, but Squarespace can do it this way. So move this thing around. It was a design partner and a marketing messaging partner. So it can do multimodal back and forth work in graphics really well. Okay. So that's kind of the three. And it's also Gemini's the best changing of graphics and ChatGPT is the best generator of graphics, although you can now generate really cool explainer graphics with Gemini. Now, one cool thing, if you're not using is Notebook LM, which is a Google product, so notebooklm.google.com. If you have Google, you have it. You can dump your documents and things into that, and it will create, it's a mini LLM for you. As Brad Oates, my friend, calls it, LLM with a little L. He's on the call, so he's laughing over there. And so you can create your own little LLM. And so let's say you put Google and you can put YouTube. You put YouTube. It's a great learning resource. But that can create explainer videos. You can press the button, create an explainer video, and it will create an entire explainer video for you, 7-8 minutes, explaining the topics that you've put into its little LLM. So it's a really cool tool also. Those are my big four. If you do the 3 LLMs and the other one, that's my big 4. Okay, the next person that was on was John Weidenfeller. John, how about you?
I'm good. I just want to add to that, to Candace's comment about because I had a kind of a big push of how do we kind of talk about security and stuff. And the argument I made that got me kind of moving with Copilot, which isn't probably one of the tops, but the easy sell was if you're using SharePoint, you could go to your management and go, if Microsoft's doing something nefarious with it, they've got it all anyways. So we could do whatever we want with Copilot because they've got all our information from SharePoint. And so that's the argument I kind of made. And then everybody kind of said, okay, they're okay with me dragging my spreadsheets
And by
into
the
it
way,
and stuff.
Copilot is better. Copilot for the enterprise may be better than anything else. And I would maybe make it 4.5. If you're working on enterprise and you do have the licensing model already, and you're paying, a lot of times you're paying for Copilot already. And so you could just flip the switch and turn it on. It's better than nothing. Okay. And so that's the one thing that's,
be careful there, because Copilot and Don, my CIO, and I are working on a document to kind of explain this to users, is you use the term Copilot synonymously. Everybody thinks they got, we go, but no, if you have a Copilot license through Enterprise, then you can dump your financials into it. And then people were going, oh, but I've got Office 365, which includes Copilot. No, that's not the paid Copilot. And that's not the person, that's not even a paid personal. That's a free version, just like I'm using for free on my personal computer. So you got to be really careful with the terminology that people are using, because that one kind of got me. I had to get to my brother online and we looked at his Office 365 Copilot and realized that it's no different than the free one I have on my personal computer. So
That's great to know, John. And I don't know
Yeah.
all those licensing agreements because I don't have a Windows model anymore. I don't even have a Windows
Oh,
machine anymore.
and the other little tricky thing that Don and I were kind of confused on was when Claude Anthropic became part of Copilot. If you turn that on, there's a phrase in the terms that says you are not using the Copilot terms, you're using the Anthropic's terms. So we're like, oh wait, does that mean does my whole argument of the SharePoint argument go away because now we've just opened up our SharePoint to
I think it will only
them?
be when you're using the Claude on the data that you're using it on. But again,
And
Claude, by the way, Enterprise uses Claude more than any other tool, even more than Copilot, because Claude is the most secure. If you're going to ask the question, which is the most secure? Claude is the most secure today. It's the most used by Enterprise today.
Yep. And everything I'm saying is with the caveat of people are going, well, what if they're using our data? Well, the term says they're not, but theoretically they could be.
This was the same argument back in the cloud. People just have to get comfortable with that they're not
Yeah.
using the data, because
Yeah.
if they're going to use the data, they're going to use the data illegally, but they're all saying they're not using the data. So you either got to believe the terms. Jonathan Hustis is up and he's a lawyer. You either got to believe the terms of the agreement, or the agreement's mute. So agreements are only as good as the people that are actually on either side of the agreement, and that's including businesses. And business entities are entities in these agreements. So we have to believe that the entities that we're dealing with, including these giant corporations, are going to do what they say in the things. And to me, they're almost emboldened to, because one slip up there would crash their business model. Okay, so it's too big a risk for the reward that they would get, in my mind.
Well, I appreciate it because between the two of you, since we already have Google Enterprise, I will start with Gemini. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And I've been playing with Gemini 3 for the first time, and anti-gravity is freaking amazing.
Yes.
I
Brad,
created
Gravity's good too. Awesome, Jonathan. What's your question? Jonathan,
I just put it out on the chat. And basically, if I want to create or databases or sort of my own thinking models? Let's say I wanted to put the complete works of Aristotle into my model somehow to have a conversation with Aristotle, or I wanted the best sources of information that I think are the best for a general topic. In other words, I want to influence the language model, but I don't want it sucking up.
The best place is this Notebook LM. It's exactly meant for that. Okay, so that's what it's great for. I'm going to share my screen and show Notebook LM because I had just created a new model yesterday that will help everybody see what it can do.
Great.
And I think it's so helpful to show it, because it's one of those things that if you don't see it, you don't get it.
Okay, I have to jump. I apologize. My last words here.
Okay, so I'm learning Claude Code. So this is what's called a notebook. And so you can add new resources by clicking, either searching the web for the resources, or adding your own. You can just upload them from your computer, paste text, pull from your Google Drive, or link to it here. And then you can then ask questions of it, or you can build something like this to learn from.
Okay, let's just jump right in, because we are in the middle of a massive shift in how software gets made.
Okay.
AI coding assistants are getting so incredibly good that they're not just writing code anymore. Nope, they're starting to review it. And
so I wasn't just talking about Claude Code in this. I'm learning about how Claude Code can look at the screen and review and read code and all of that. So pretty amazing.
Okay, I'm going to jump. The last thing I want to say to anybody who's never worked with Brad before, who's listening for the first time, hey, Bob, you were great. Thank you. And Brad's the guy. That's it. Brad's the guy.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
so
John.
much, guys.
And everybody, I appreciate you joining today.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to stop it there unless there's some critical questions. We're going to stop it there. Thank you, Bob, again so
Yeah.
much for joining. If you have any more questions, send them to me directly. Thanks, everybody. It was really, really fun having you. Thank you, Bob, again.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Great to be with you, Brad. Great to learn from you.
Okay. Thanks, guys.